Rabbi Sherman gets the credit for the opening of this sermon because on Rosh Hashanah he asked us, when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up? And that sparked a memory that I had not thought of for quite a while. That when I was 5 or 6 years old, my mother said to me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And with the foresight and the prescience of a future rabbi, I said, a cowboy. And my mother said, how will you make money? And that's when I realized that my mother knew much less about cowboys than I did. I explained to her, by riding horses. Now, to be fair, at the time, I didn't know that I was allergic to horses. And so the cowboy thing never panned out. But I discovered that there were Jewish cowboys. There was Charles Cowboy Rosenthal in the early 1900s, who was a fairly famous rodeo rider. And those of you who know the music of Kinky Friedman and the Jew Boys know that one of his most popular songs is Ride 'em Jew Boy. There are all kinds of Jews. I've traveled around the world, and everywhere I've been, whether Laos or Rwanda, Cambodia, India, I have found Jews. And I have also found Jews of every disposition. There are proud Jews and pious Jews and preachy Jews, angry Jews, rebellious Jews, wealthy Jews, poor Jews, learned Jews, and ignorant Jews. There are Jews who fight each other, Jews who forgive each other, and Jews she'eino yodea lishol, who don't even know what it's all about. But the rarest kind of Jew is a Jew who is indifferent to other Jews. We all have opinions about each other. So what are our attitudes to Jews who are different, Jews who differ from us? There is a time, you know, right now, when Jews, even who are very close, cannot get along. Divergent views are tearing families apart, and people find it impossible to speak with each other. And so tonight I want to talk to you about the size of our hearts. But I don't want to begin with today's Jews. Let's start by reminding ourselves what our tradition has to say about people who do wrong. And here, I just want to warn you, because I see some who are young, this is the X-rated portion of the sermon. But I'm reading straight from the Talmud, from Avodah Zarah. Here it goes. This is what it says. They said about Rav Elazar ben Dordaya that he did not leave one prostitute in the world with whom he did not engage in sexual intercourse. Straight from the Talmud. Once, he heard there was a prostitute in a city overseas who would take a purse full of dinars as her payment. He took a purse full of dinars and crossed 7 seas to reach her. During sex, she said, Elazar ben Dordaya, even if he repents, will not be accepted in repentance. Not what you want to hear, actually. Well, I'll leave it. I'll leave the rest of the sentence for you to fill in. But it shocked him. And all of a sudden, he went outside and he looked up at the mountains and he said, Harimu gvaot bakshu alai rachamim. Mountains and hills plead on my behalf, but they said no. Then he went and looked at the stars and the sun and the moon, and he said to them, please plead for mercy on my behalf, but they said no. And so finally, Elazar ben Dordaya said, the matter depends on me. and he sat down, and he put his head in his hands, and he cried and pleaded and prayed until his soul left his body. And then a voice came from heaven that said, Elazar ben Dordaya has been forgiven and has a place in the world to come. In other words, there was a moment of recognition where this rabbi knew what he had done, but his passion shifted. He had been passionate for sin and became passionate for repentance. And that is not the only time we read that story. The Torah appreciates passion. There's the story of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan saw Reish Lakish, who was a bandit and a thief, but he was a thief who had charisma and energy and passion. And Rabbi Yochanan said to him, if only you would turn that to Torah, you could be a great rabbi. And Reish Lakish stopped being a thief and became one of the great rabbis of the Talmud. So now let's turn to our community. You know who's full of passion? Jews who are angry at Israel, especially young Jews who are angry at Israel. Now, how do we react to them? Are we capable of seeing Reish Lakish in them? People who are gifted with passion, even if it's in ways that we think are wrong or destructive? Are our hearts large enough to receive them as God did with Elazar ben Dordaya or Rabbi Yochanan did with Reish Lakish? And some who are among our children, who see Israel very differently than we do, how do we react? Remember, this is Yom Kippur. And the thing about Yom Kippur is that you are not supposed to point fingers at someone else. This is not a time to say what other people did wrong. This is a time to think about what we've done wrong, to take responsibility. So I ask myself, as I hope you ask yourself, do we have no responsibility for our children's beliefs? If we take credit when they believe what we like, do we have no responsibility when they believe what we disapprove of? Is it all on them and not at all on us? As you know, as I have told you, again and again, I approached those encampments at Harvard and I tried to get them to speak to me, and they wouldn't. Some of them even said we were instructed not to talk to you. But every time I left, I had this short poem that I learned in childhood go through my head by Edwin Markham. He drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout, but love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. I thought, we're not done drawing our circles. Can we draw a circle large enough to know that people change, and they change more from acceptance than they do from exclusion? They learn from more from people willing to listen to them than people who shut them out. Now, let's push it and widen the circle, and in good cowboy style, rope in another group. How should we feel about a group that is even harder for us, the sufferings of those who are not in the Jewish community? The Torah teaches, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you should love your neighbor as yourself, and it also teaches, V'ahavta et hager, you should love the stranger. Nowhere in the Torah, nowhere does it say to hate your enemies. Nowhere in the Torah does it say to hate your enemies. If you express sadness and even heartbreak for the suffering in Gaza, that is not a betrayal. It is a fulfillment of Jewish ethics. It means you have a heart. It says in the Torah, Im ra'ev sana'acha Ha'achalehu lechem v'im tzameh hashkehu mayim. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. Forget the cause of the suffering. We don't always have to leap to causes. The pain of Gazans, especially children, is a human tragedy. Are our neshamas, our souls, too coarsened to acknowledge that? God forbid. You remember the story of the Tzemach Tzedek, the scholar who was studying, and he didn't hear the cry of a child because he was so focused on his study. And his grandfather, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad, said to him, if your study is such that you cannot hear the cry of a child, there is something wrong with your study. Notice in that story, he doesn't say a Jewish child. He says a child. I do not accept the idea that I'm not a committed, devoted supporter of Israel merely because I'm pained by the suffering of children. What a deeply un-Jewish idea that would be. Of course, like you, I think about the hostages every day. I think about those we have lost among our people and those soldiers who have died and who are wounded every day. When I spoke a few weeks ago to a group from the IDF, I marched them in here and they saw that poster, and you know what one of them said to me? There isn't a synagogue in Israel that has a poster like that up, but we do. But that doesn't mean you can't leave the doors of your heart open. You can feel pain beyond our pain. Are there people who are true haters of Israel and true haters of Jews, both sadly among our people and outside of our people, people who will never be drawn into the circle? Of course there are. We all know that. But why immediately do we think about them? Why don't we think about those who, if we open our hearts to them, might be able to hear what we have to say? Because I will tell you something about the Jewish community that I've discovered now traveling the world speaking to Jews about this. We are so much better at identifying our enemies than we are at embracing our friends. How do we speak to people who have political differences? We are a small people and we're sitting atop a volcano. We cannot afford to forget that we need each other and we need allies. And allies are not people who are in perfect alignment with us. They don't have to do everything we say to be an ally. And the moment they don't, they're an enemy. That is a very bad way to make friends. Let me tell you a story that happened shortly after October 7th. I was speaking at a Milken conference. And alongside me was speaking on the same panel, Van Jones from CNN, who has been a really powerful supporter of Israel. And he said he went to 140 black leaders in Atlanta. And he said to them, these are all business leaders, all very successful, all his contemporaries and people that he knows have a lot of sway in the world. And he said to them, you know, the Jews were there for us. Now they need us. We should be there for them. And he said, you know what almost every one of them said to him? Think for a second what you think they said, and then I'll tell you what they said. What they said to him was, someone needs us? No one had ever expressed our need. We had expressed our demand. We'd said, we were there for you, why aren't you there for us? But we never said, we're hurting, we need you. Now I ask you, is someone more likely to help you if you tell them they owe you, or you tell them you need them? When you reach out to someone, there really is a chance they'll reach back. Even on these high holidays, I have heard rabbis demonize the government of Israel Not in this synagogue, God forbid. And I have heard people demonize opponents to the government of Israel. But what I say to both is, you don't get people to change or communities to grow by angry excommunications. Denunciation feels good. And anger is a drug. But anger doesn't only close doors, it bolts them shut. I'm all for passion, but I want the passion that comes from love, not from rage. I want humility that comes from the recognition that sometimes we get things wrong, and I want the growth that comes from listening, not the cheap excitement of excoriation. You remember the story of a boy who approached the rabbi and said, "Why is it that when I peel open the flower, the petals just fell off? And I couldn't get it to open the way it's supposed to." And the rabbi said, "That's because flowers are like people. They open from the inside." So do communities. We open from the inside with compassion for those who suffer, understanding for those who differ, and conviction that ours is a sacred mission. The prophet Isaiah said, "If you pound your stakes in harder, harchivi makomo halecha, your tent will expand." In other words, the deeper our own conviction, the more we can reach out to others. Scared and insecure people don't feel compassion for those outside their circle. We are a small people, but we have never been small people. I want to say that again. We are a small people, but we've never been small people. The Torah tells us we're an Am Segulah, a treasured nation. So we know that God treasures us. But when do we learn to treasure each other? I never became a rider of horses, but I know the old equestrian adage, throw your heart across the fence and the horse will follow. The Jewish people have to be strong but flexible, stout-hearted but also open-hearted. It takes all kinds of Jews, it always has. But there are two things that have always been true in Jewish history. We have always argued with each other, and we have always needed each other. Throw your heart across the fence, and the horse will follow. You know what my mother would have done had I grown up to be a cowboy? She would have loved a Jewish cowboy. We love not only when it's easy, but when it's hard. It's no merit to love the lovable. But when someone is angry with you or pushes you away or differs with you or thinks you are wrong, then can you draw them close? Do you have the spiritual strength to do that? The expansive soul. It is Yom Kippur. It's a time not only for individuals, but for the Jewish people of repentance, return, and renewal. So I close by reminding you of the story of the Baal Shem Tov. That a man came to him in terrible distress and said, "I don't know what to do. My child is lost. He has strayed. He's no longer part of my world or my community. I don't know what to do with such a child." And the Baal Shem Tov said, "Love him more. Love him more. Love him more." May this year we all be inscribed in the book of love and the book of life.